We're going to take a look at the spinal cord next. So let's take a look at a picture of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is continuous with the brainstem and is encased in the vertebral column. It gives off 31 pairs of spinal nerves. These spinal nerves are mixed nerves, meaning that they contain both afferent and efferent neurons. So remember, the afferent neurons are sensory neurons bringing information from the periphery into the spinal cord. And they also contain efferent neurons, which are taking motor signals out to the muscles and the glands. The spinal nerves are actually part of the peripheral nervous system because they are located outside of the spinal cord. So anything outside of the brain and spinal cord is part of the peripheral nervous system. So the spinal nerves would be part of the peripheral nervous system. And the spinal cord, the gray matter, remember, is on the inside, and the white matter is on the outside. And let's just take a look at a picture of this. So the gray matter being on the inside, this is where all the synapses are occurring. You've got the axon terminals synapsing with the dendrites and the cell bodies here. And on the dorsal or posterior sides, that would be on your back side, we have the dorsal horns. So you've got one on each side here. And this is where the sensory neurons will be coming in to the spinal cord. And the way I remember this is if someone is patting you on the back, you will feel that. And so that's how I remember that the sensory information is coming in through the dorsal or posterior horns. And then the ventral or anterior horns, these will be on your front side. And that's where the motor neurons that will then go out to the muscles and the glands are going to be located. So the way I remember this one is that your arms are on your front side and they're moving. And so that's how I remember that the motor neurons are going to be coming off of these ventral or anterior horns. And this is showing the horns of the spinal cord in the gray matter. So you can see the sensory neuron starting in the skin. So maybe somebody's poking you in the arm. And the sensory neurons will send some action potentials up through this spinal nerve. And we're going to go up through this dorsal root and synapse in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. And then we're going to synapse again over here on the motor neuron that is in the ventral horn of the gray matter, and that will then synapse with the biceps, maybe in your arm, and tell you to move your arm so you can move away from whoever is touching your arm. We also have in our spinal cord the white matter. So they've colored some of the different tracts. Remember, a tract is just a bundle of myelinated axons, so the white matter here, and they've just colored them in some blue and purple here. You don't have to memorize any of the names of the tracts, but just what I want you to realize is that some of these tracts, these myelinated axons, are ascending tracts, meaning that they're traveling up towards the brain, and those are all going to be sensory. And the descending tracts are traveling from the brain down toward the muscles and the glands, and those are all going to be motor neurons that are traveling in the descending tracts. And this is important as well. Looking at these sensory pathways, there are 3 neurons to get from the periphery up to the cerebral cortex, and then you're aware that you're poking your finger on the rose thorn. Okay, so we start with the sensory neuron that's in your skin of your finger, and we're going to synapse in that dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So that's our first neuron. And then the second neuron is going to be traveling up the spinal cord. And then we're going to synapse here in the thalamus, which we'll talk about later. So that's our second neuron. And then our third neuron will then take that sensory information to the cerebral cortex, and then we'll be aware that we're poking our finger. So sensory pathways, there's 3 neurons that it takes to get the sensory information up to the brain from the periphery. And then the motor pathways, it only takes 2 neurons to get from the cerebral cortex down to the skeletal muscle. So you can see in the cerebral cortex, we've got our what we call our upper motor neuron, and they're actually showing you 2 different motor pathways here, but we'll just take a look at one of them. So our first motor neuron here is going to travel from the cerebral cortex down the spinal cord, and then it's going to synapse in that ventral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. And then here's our second neuron that will then travel from the ventral horn of the spinal cord to the skeletal muscle. So you can see that it only takes 2 motor neurons to go from the cerebral cortex to the skeletal muscle. And that makes sense because you want to be able to get that signal to your skeletal muscle really quickly in order to stimulate your muscle to contract and move fast.